Every time you merge onto an interstate to commute to work or take a cross-country road trip, you are driving on a massive, unified network of concrete and steel. Yet the standardized, nationwide federal highway system we know today was not introduced until 1956. Before that year, trying to navigate smoothly from one state to another often meant facing a chaotic patchwork of disconnected dirt paths and local tolls. How did a nation obsessed with local control finally surrender its landscape to a massive federal engineering project? Who actually decided which towns would be connected by these new high-speed arteries and which would be bypassed and left to wither? This is not just a story about laying down asphalt and painting lines. It is a fundamental battle over commercial power, military logistics, and the literal reshaping of the American map. In the late 19th century, the concept of a long-distance paved road was practically alien to most citizens. The vast majority of American transit relied on steel railway tracks or navigable rivers to move heavy goods. Local dirt roads existed primarily to connect a farmer's field to the nearest railway depot, and they were maintained exclusively by county or township authorities. The earliest push for better roads did not even come from automobile drivers, but from organized bicycle enthusiasts. In the 1890s, the League of American Wheelmen published detailed cycling maps and lobbied local politicians for smooth, paved surfaces. Their relentless petitioning forced local governments to start looking at road conditions as a public service rather than a private nuisance. When mass-produced cars began rolling off assembly lines in the early 1900s, this localized system completely collapsed under the pressure. A driver crossing a county line might suddenly find their smooth macadam surface turning into an impassable, muddy swamp. There was no universal signage, no standardized numbering system, and absolutely no coordination between neighboring states. The federal government finally stepped in with the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916. The printed text of the legislation offered matching funds to states that established professional highway departments. However, this early law explicitly forbade spending federal money in towns with more than 2,500 residents, keeping the focus entirely on rural postal routes. Because the 1916 law lacked a unified national vision, private commercial groups tried to fill the void. Entrepreneurs and automobile manufacturers formed the Lincoln Highway Association to chart a single, continuous route from New York to San Francisco. They painted their red, white, and blue logo on telegraph poles along the way, begging local governments to improve the specific stretches of road that fell within their borders. The true breaking point for the patchwork system came in the summer of 1919. The War Department organized a transcontinental motor convoy to test how quickly the military could move heavy equipment across the country in an emergency. A young lieutenant colonel named Dwight David Eisenhower was assigned as an observer for the grueling journey. The convoy's daily logbook recorded a seemingly endless series of mechanical disasters and collapsed wooden bridges. Heavy Army trucks sank up to their axles in Midwestern mud, forcing exhausted soldiers to manually winch vehicles out of ditches day after day. It took the military expedition 62 grueling days to reach the Pacific coast at an average speed of just 6 miles per hour. Eisenhower filed his official reports detailing the absolute logistical failure of the expedition. He realized that in the event of a foreign invasion or a domestic crisis, the United States could not rapidly deploy its own army within its own borders. The country desperately needed a unified, heavy-duty road network, but the political will to fund such a massive, centralized project simply did not exist yet. Congress attempted another fix with the Federal Highway Act of 1921. The newly drafted federal maps required states to designate up to 7% of their roads as primary routes eligible for federal funding. This was the first time the government demanded that state highways actually connect at their borders, but it still fell far short of a dedicated, high-speed interstate system. Throughout the Roaring '20s, automobile ownership exploded, making the lack of standardized navigation a daily nightmare for drivers. To solve this, federal and state officials convened in 1926 to create the United States Numbered Highway System. This agreement finally replaced the confusing array of private name trails with a uniform, shield-shaped sign and a logical, numerical grid. However, these numbered routes were not the divided, high-speed interstates we know today. They were still regular two-lane roads that ran directly through the center of every small town, subject to local speed traps and stoplights. As commercial trucking expanded, these main streets quickly became choked with dangerous, heavy freight traffic. During the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt envisioned a massive network of transcontinental toll superhighways to put millions of unemployed men to work. He handed a hand-drawn map of proposed routes to Thomas McDonald, the powerful chief of the Bureau of Public Roads. McDonald was a bureaucratic titan who fundamentally distrusted the idea of charging tolls for public transit. McDonald's agency published a massive feasibility report in 1939 called Toll Roads and Free Roads, which decisively rejected Roosevelt's toll scheme. The printed traffic flow maps inside the report proved that most highway traffic was local, not cross-country. Therefore, McDonald argued, the new highways must physically penetrate deep into urban centers rather than bypassing them, setting a fateful precedent for city planning. Progress halted as the nation entered the Second World War, but the conflict ultimately provided the defining catalyst for the modern system. As Allied forces pushed into Germany in 1945, Supreme Commander Dwight David Eisenhower marveled at the regional Autobahn network. He saw firsthand how these wide, grade-separated expressways allowed the enemy to seamlessly shift troops and massive military hardware across the country. Even before the war ended, Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1944. The official legislative text authorized the designation of a 40,000-mile national system of interstate highways. Crucially, though, lawmakers failed to appropriate any dedicated funding mechanism, leaving the ambitious blueprints gathering dust in state highway departments. The post-war economic boom brought a tidal wave of new cars onto the already crumbling infrastructure. By the early 1950s, traffic fatalities soared, and the nation faced an absolute gridlock crisis. State governors begged Washington for a financial solution, realizing that local tax bases could never support the astronomical cost of building multi-lane, access-controlled superhighways. When Eisenhower ascended to the presidency in 1953, he brought his haunting memories of the 1919 Mud Convoy and the German Autobahns directly into the Oval Office. He appointed his trusted advisor, General Lucius Clay, to head a special committee tasked with solving the highway funding puzzle once and for all. The battle over who would pay for this monumental concrete web was about to begin in earnest. The political gridlock over funding finally broke in the summer of 1956. Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, creating the massive nationwide interstate system we navigate today. The federal government agreed to cover a staggering 90% of the construction costs, leaving the states to pay only 10%. The legislation mandated incredibly strict, uniform engineering standards that applied from coast to coast. The published design manuals required lanes to be exactly 12 feet wide, with broad shoulders to accommodate broken-down vehicles. Furthermore, the manual strictly prohibited intersection stoplights, meaning every single crossing required an expensive bridge or underpass to maintain uninterrupted, high-speed traffic. To pay for this unprecedented public works project without exploding the national deficit, lawmakers created the Highway Trust Fund. The official Treasury ledgers recorded a brand new federal gasoline tax of 3 cents per gallon. Every time a driver filled their tank, their money went directly into this ring-fenced account, ensuring a continuous stream of construction capital. To sell this enormous tax burden to a skeptical public, Eisenhower heavily emphasized the system's vital military importance. The official Defense Department memoranda designated the network as the National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Planners argued that these wide corridors were absolutely necessary to rapidly evacuate major cities in the event of a nuclear attack. The engineers also established a rigid, nationwide numbering system to replace the chaotic local signs. The standardized federal route grid assigned odd numbers to north and south highways, and even numbers to routes running east and west. This mathematical layout allowed drivers to navigate across multiple state lines without ever looking at a local street map. With funding secured, the battle shifted to deciding exactly where the concrete would be poured. The Bureau of Public Roads distributed a planning document known as the Yellow Book to state highway departments. This book contained hundreds of detailed maps showing proposed interstate routes cutting directly through densely populated urban cores. These urban routing decisions had devastating consequences for established communities across the country. Highway planners deliberately targeted low-income and minority neighborhoods, using eminent domain to seize and demolish thousands of homes and local businesses. Vibrant urban districts were permanently severed by massive trenches of concrete and roaring traffic. As the bulldozers arrived to clear these urban paths, unprecedented citizen uprisings known as the highway revolts began to erupt. Neighborhood coalitions filed frantic legal injunctions to block the construction of elevated expressways through their local parks and historic districts. While a few cities successfully stopped the concrete from pouring, most local protests were ultimately crushed by the sheer momentum of federal funding. Conversely, the new interstates created massive economic windfalls for the emerging suburbs. Commuters could now live dozens of miles away from their downtown offices and drive to work at high speeds. This rural connectivity sparked an explosion of standardized roadside motels, fast food franchises, and massive retail shopping malls that catered exclusively to the automobile. The physical map of the United States was entirely rewritten by the engineers who drafted the interstate blueprints. Towns that secured an off-ramp thrived on the new flow of commercial trucking and tourism. Meanwhile, historic communities bypassed by the new superhighways watched their local economies wither and die as cross-country traffic vanished overnight. Today, the interstate system remains a monument to both brilliant logistical engineering and ruthless urban displacement. We traded the slow, democratic chaos of local dirt roads for a high-speed federal machine that reshaped American geography forever. When you look at how highways cut through your own city, do you think the economic benefits of seamless nationwide travel justified the permanent destruction of historic urban neighborhoods? Understanding the hidden blueprints of our modern infrastructure reveals how invisible decisions from the past still steer our daily lives. To uncover more stories about the hidden architecture of the systems we live under, subscribe to our channel.